The United States has more people in prison than anywhere else in the world. Almost 2.5 million prisoners are currently behind bars, equivalent to jailing the population of Chicago, America's third largest city. Human rights groups report a majority of them are Latinos and African Americans from poor communities. They're locked away for nonviolent crimes, from buying illegal narcotics to illegally crossing into the United States. Because of overcrowding, the federal government and several states are paying huge sums of money to private prison companies or for-profit prisons to house thousands of inmates. Critics say for every new person that gets locked up, private prisons get richer. As correspondent Mike Kirsch reports, it's led to concerns about inmate care.
It was here in Nashville, Tennessee, about a decade ago, when a particularly brutal murder went down that still has people talking about it to this day. It happened inside this prison. The victim, Estelle Richardson, a mother of two, doing time here after buying pain medication illegally on the streets. The morning she died, she had been found unresponsive in solitary confinement with a fractured skull and several broken ribs. According to the police report, the only people that could have laid a hand on her were the 4 prison guards ultimately charged with killing her: Andre Hendricks, William Wood, Jeremy Neese, and Joshua Shockman. Shockman, when not guarding prisoners, a mixed martial arts fighter, as seen in videos posted on YouTube. His nickname, the Warhammer.
If you don't buy a ticket to come see the Warhammer, you're going to get punished.
Shockman's not responded to several CCTV attempts to reach him. As a prison guard at the time, he was described as being overzealous in his dealings with inmates. But he and his fellow guards denied killing Richardson. Some say what may have helped their defense is that the crime happened at this particular prison, a private prison company contracted by the local county government. And not just any private prison company, but the biggest, richest, most powerful private corrections company in the United States, Corrections Corporation of America, headquartered right here in Nashville, Tennessee. Corrections Corporation of America, or CCA, operates, according to its website, more than 60 other private prisons across the United States, from federal detention centers housing undocumented Latino immigrants to state prisons with American inmates serving time mostly for nonviolent, drug-related crimes. In all, CCA houses 70,000 prison inmates nationwide. When CCA's prisoner in Nashville, Estelle Richardson, was murdered, CCA managed to get the murder charges against its guards dropped. How? Because the surveillance camera over Richardson's prison cell had inexplicably been turned off the day of her murder. Without visual proof of who killed her, CCA's guards walked free. Richardson's family protested, saying that CCA got away with murder, a murder that remains unsolved to this day. The history of American prisons in general is not a pleasant one. The United Nations has referred to U.S. prisons run by federal, state, and local government as some of the most dysfunctional, abusive, and torturous penal institutions known to man. In the early 1980s, private prisons began to emerge across the U.S. landscape, mainly to relieve overcrowded prison populations in traditional government-run facilities. Prison populations that began to explode as a result of America's war on drugs policy that was landing thousands of new drug offenders behind bars every day. For example, overcrowded and overwhelmed government-run prisons like in California have been ordered by courts to alleviate overcrowding by moving inmates to newly available prison space offered by private prison operations. In other words, California pays private for-profit corrections companies to manage some of its prison population. Essentially, private prisons are renting out storage space for prisoners. The more prisoners they take in, the more money or profits they make on their leases. Companies such as Nashville-based CCA have been profiting enormously. CCA's annual revenues today, for example, approach nearly $2 billion. So when CCTV set out to report about private prisons, we naturally felt it only logical to speak to someone here with the private prison industry leader, CCA.
What can I do for you?
Yes, I'm here with CCTV, Chinese Central Television. My name is Mike Kirsch. I'm a journalist.
What can I do for you?
I'd like to speak with the media representative for CCA.
All right, stand by.
Thank you. CCA's corporate media representative is Jonathan Burns, who CCTV emailed ahead of time requesting an interview and a tour of a CCA prison facility.
Okay, I spoke to Jonathan Burns. He said that he had spoke with you.
Yes, we corresponded by email, that's correct, and he told me to email my questions in.
He's not here.
Oh, he's not here?
No,
The press representative's not here?
that's correct.
Is there someone else I can speak with?
No, you need an appointment.
CCA ultimately declined CCTV's request for a prison tour and for an interview.
Jails are terrible because
So, next, we turn to Alex Friedman, considered one of the nation's foremost experts on private prisons, because he was a prisoner at one for 6 years at a CCA prison here in Tennessee for an armed robbery he committed as a young adult that he says almost got him killed.
when I was robbing the store, the guy did not want to be robbed, and so he pulled out a .38 and shot me, and then I got into a gun battle with him, shot at him. I was incarcerated for committing the crimes of armed robbery, assault with attempt to commit murder, and attempted aggravated robbery.
You don't look like such a person.
People tell me that all the time, and then I have to ask them, well, what does an armed robber look like? I don't offer any excuses for the crimes I committed back in the late 1980s and early 1990s. I basically like to say I was young and stupid and greedy at the time, and now I am older and less stupid and less greedy.
Friedman says his experience as a prisoner is like a PhD in how private prisons operate. Indeed, Friedman's testified on private prison issues before U.S. legislators. Since his release from prison, he's run a nonprofit prisoners' rights watchdog group called Private Corrections Institute,
This is Alex Friedman.
routinely blowing the whistle against what he claims is rampant corporate greed and corruption inside the private prison industry. Examples of which he says have been widely publicized, starting with what he calls the poster child of private prison greed, America's notorious Kids for Cash private prison scandal in Pennsylvania in 2008, when more than 2,000 school-aged children who'd committed minor offenses, if any at all, were locked up in private prisons that had paid two local judges $1 million each in bribes to send these kids to jail.
Sending children to jails in return for cash.
Two judges in Pennsylvania pleaded guilty today to taking huge payoffs to send teenagers to privately run detention centers.
Both judges received lengthy prison terms, one of them memorably confronted by an outraged mother whose young son killed himself after his private prison ordeal.
You scumbag! You ruined my f***ing life! You did it for my son!
Other examples of greed and corruption, says Friedman, private prisons profiting by overcharging government clients or American taxpayers for prison guards that are underpaid and also dangerously underqualified. That has led to abuse of prisoners. In one case, to the alleged rape of dozens of female inmates at a private prison in Kentucky. To violent prison riots at others. To prison escapes while prison guards were allegedly slacking off and not paying attention. To prison guards like these three guys from CCA's Nashville prison caught forcing inmates to make handcrafts that they'd turn around and sell, pocketing the proceeds. Friedman says private prisons are so dysfunctional because as private companies, they are not obligated under law to publicly report much of what goes on inside their prisons, as government-run prisons are required to do. Thus, private prisons are said to be less accountable and less transparent about how they operate. What is clear, he says, is that private prisons are making enormous profits by various means. Achieving these profits, for example, by maintaining lower overhead costs by paying their employees much less than employees working in government-run facilities. In addition, private prisons profiting, of course, from each cell space they lease out. The more cells filled, the bigger the contract and profit. And some private prisons are said to actually have contracts that include what are called lockup quotas, which means that taxpayers ultimately have to pay a penalty tax for any empty cell space in a prison should local authorities not deliver enough prisoners to fill the spaces. A for-profit private prison system that Alex Friedman says seemingly encourages cities and states to arrest as many people as possible in order to fill the cells of private prisons or pay penalties if they don't. In short, profits based on how many people are locked up. Friedman asks, what's next? Privatizing police forces in the U.S.?
And to give an example, if we use the example of a privatized police force, and we told people that our policemen will no longer be public officials, rather they'll be private corporate employees, and the more arrests they make, the more money they'll make. And most people would say, well, I see a problem with that, because they would be incentivized to arrest as many people as possible, because that's how they would make more money. And that's not going to work. But we have the exact same system in our private prisons, where private prison companies make more money if they incarcerate more people for longer periods of time. So this is the inherent problem with for-profit prisons, is that they are for-profit.
Friedman says private prison executives, like some in charge at CCA in Nashville, are living large in million-dollar country club estates outside of town, raking in multi-million-dollar salaries after generating multi-billion-dollar profits each year for shareholders and investors that, among them, include several large American banks and U.S. corporations. In addition to private prisons becoming more and more wealthy, there are other prison industry service-related companies making huge profits. From prisoner transportation companies that move prisoners from court to prison and back, to firms providing medical services to prisoners, or phone communications for inmates and their families. And there are large food companies that must feed private prison inmates. All these companies earning huge profits, says Friedman, on the backs of inmates in private prisons across the United States.
We are opposed to private prisons. We seek the abolition of the private prison industry. We believe that for-profit corrections has no place in a civilized and democratic society.
What's particularly aggravating to CCA is that Alex Friedman has bought stock in the company, which allows him to show up at CCA's annual shareholder meetings. You might call Friedman the ultimate party crasher. How would you be received at cocktail hour?
Not very well, I'm sure. I do attend their annual shareholder meetings. As an activist shareholder, I own stock for the purpose of attending their shareholder meetings, questioning their board members, and filing shareholder resolutions. They can't keep me out. So even as a former prisoner at a CCA prison, CCA still has to welcome me to their annual shareholder meeting just like any other shareholder. And they have to respond to my resolutions just like any other shareholder. I mean, I'll go in, I'll shake hands with the corporate executives, I'll ask my embarrassing questions that they don't want to answer.
Such as?
Why are you incarcerating women and children as young as 5 years old in prison-like conditions in immigration detention facilities?
How do they respond?
Well, of course, there's corporate responses, corporate speak. Sometimes it's, well, we can't respond because of pending litigation. Or, no problem, we've already looked into that and investigated ourselves, and there's nothing to see here. There's no problem at all.
When CCTV attempted to raise these criticisms with CCA, CCA declined comment and instead sent us a public relations video.
Every day we serve our communities. From small towns to large cities at more than 60 locations across our country. We play an important role in public safety.
CCA also lauding its employment of many U.S. military veterans, all while generating 5 to 15% in savings to American taxpayers, helping 30,000 inmates each day learn job skills, giving each student, inmate, person a chance to return home, to get a good job, build a better life. The private prison industry has strong support from a respected nonprofit think tank in America known as the Reason Foundation that advocates less government and more privatization in society. The Reason Foundation's Leonard Gilroy tells CCTV that private prisons are just part of the American way of doing business.
Number one, we live in a capitalist society. Governments contract out literally, almost everything you can think of. Quick examples might be building and operating highways, trimming trees in city parks, operating hospitals, paving streets, collecting trash, providing water and wastewater, all kinds of things. And so in that context, operating a prison is not something that is necessarily inherently governmental. And so to that point, I think there really isn't any inherent problem with a company making a profit if they're providing a good service, just like you would find in the private sector. If Apple makes a good phone or Samsung makes a good phone, we reward that company with profits. That's a signal in the marketplace. Prisons are certainly not utopias, and you're going to have bad incidents that happen in well-run public prisons, and you're going to have bad incidents that happen in well-run private facilities. That is part of the system.
No, it's very common. These companies want as little transparency as possible. They are private companies. That means that in general, what they do is in the private sector. They are not transparent. They're not accountable to the public like our public institutions.
And what happens to inmates once they leave private prisons? We asked CCA if it could introduce us to, for example, a prison inmate it had recently helped find a good job and better life outside this prison. CCA declined to show us one.
This gonna be a grip.
Though some local nonprofit human rights workers in Nashville introduced CCTV to one recently released CCA inmate now living in a wooded area just a few miles from CCA headquarters. His name is Jesse James Upchurch.
I'm homeless, man. I'm walking out here in the cold. I ain't got no place to go, man.
CCA confirmed Upchurch's long criminal history, which spans 30 years, in and out of prison for crimes ranging from selling illegal narcotics, burglary, to most recently, aggravated assault. What about people who see this and they say, well, Jesse, you put yourself in this position. You shouldn't.
I've done my time, but you put me out here and you expect me to do right, tell me to do right, you educate me to do right, but if I ain't got no help, what am I supposed to do?
You got anywhere?
Man.
You got anywhere to live?
I ain't got no place to live, I ain't got no place to go.
Upchurch says he can't find a job because of his criminal history. And he says when he's sent back to CCA for minor crimes like drinking in public, he says it's almost as if CCA is happy to see him come walking back through the door because it means more profit.
Follow the money. So if you want to know why we have private prisons despite all the documented abuses that have occurred over decades, follow the money. See where it leads. So you have these companies being paid hundreds of millions of dollars from government contracts, and then they take a portion of that money, millions of dollars, and they give it back to politicians in the form of campaign contributions, donations, and lobbying expenses. And as a result, they get more contracts. So it's a recurring cycle, and people are making money.
The higher number of people arrested and sent to these prisons, says Friedman, the bigger the profits for companies like CCA.
There are losers and there are winners. The winners are the ones making money. The losers are everybody else.
The losers, Friedman says, private prison inmates like Jesse James Upchurch.
Because I'm sick of being here. I'm ready to lay down and die.
While private prison companies like CCA claim many prisoners have access to programs to educate themselves and to prepare themselves for a new life after serving their time, the fact is more than 60% of prisoners released from private prisons return after committing another crime. That spells more profits for private prisons, at the expense of many prisoners in America hoping for a second chance and staying out of prison for good.
My dream is to just been in a place that's warm, where I can eat, where somebody says I love you every day. Thank you for being alive.
Upchurch says he believes his well-being as a prison inmate inside a CCA prison is the last thing on CCA's mind.
All they're doing is trying to make money.
A week later, after drinking, Jesse was arrested and booked back into the local CCA prison. After the murder of Estelle Richardson here at its Nashville facility, CCA paid her family $2 million to settle a wrongful death lawsuit. Still, Friedman hopes someone will come forward with information about the crime He's raised a $35,000 reward for that information. Little has been heard from the 4 guards accused in her murder since charges were dropped against them. Josh Schachman, the Warhammer, survived to fight another day, and today is said to be a fighting instructor. To date, CCA refuses to answer CCTV's questions about Estelle Richardson's murder. Though through its public relations videos, CCA assures the public it hires only the best employees at its facilities, who get the best parking spots right up front, from Employee of the Month to those working in quality assurance. Quality assurance?
Yes, quality assurance is basically covering things up.
What goes on inside private prisons, says Friedman, unfortunately, often stays inside private prisons.